Welcome to Empowering Women, and today we are honored to have Anita Diamant with us. And you all probably know Anita from her best-selling book, The Red Tent. And let me tell you a little bit more about Anita, because she is much more than that. She is a beloved author of the best-selling novel, The Red Tent, and she's written 6 guidebooks to Jewish life and life cycle events. She's contributed to local magazines and newspapers, including the Boston Globe, the Boston Magazine, and features and columns are covered a wide variety of topics, from profiles of prominent people and stories about medical ethics to first-person essays ranging from politics to popular culture and dog ownership. Her new novel is Day After Night, and she's written, as I said, 4 novels. Day After Night is a story about women who have lived through the Holocaust and await the future in a British internment camp. It's a story of loss, hope, and courage set in the days before the founding of the State of Israel. Anita is also founding president of Mymikvah, Living Waters Community Mikvah in Newton, Massachusetts. So welcome, Anita, and I'd like to really begin with The Red Tent.
Okay.
And 1997, your first novel comes out, and it's The Red Tent. And tell us how that was received.
Well, it was received with thunderous silence. It was not reviewed. It wasn't advertised. My beloved editor left the publishing company, so I was orphaned. This happens a lot to writers. And so it did okay in hardcover, but not very well, and it almost didn't make it into paperback. But I actually got creative. I asked the publishing company if they would take the hardbacks that they were going to pulp and destroy, because it's cheaper to destroy them than to warehouse them. And I said, can we send them out to some groups that I know? So a friend of mine who was the president of the Reform Movement's women rabbis wrote a letter, and they sent it to all of them. Another woman friend of mine who was the president of the Reconstructionist rabbis sent it to all of them with a letter endorsing it. And then really the reason it's a bestseller is book groups, women's book groups, completely. It was a word of mouth phenomenon. That I think helped get the word out, sending them to my rabbinical friends. Right. But truly what made it a bestseller was women liking it, enjoying it in their book groups, and recommending it to other women's book groups. And that's why I'm sitting here.
Okay.
So yes. I owe it all to women and to women's book groups.
Now, it's really a story about women's relationships, truly.
Truly.
And I know your latest novel, Day After Night, that's also for women.
Mm-hmm. Well, I hope my books are for everyone.
Yeah.
But they all 4 of them really focus on women's friendships.
Yeah.
They're all very, very different, but they do have that theme running through them: the importance of women's friendships within families, and also, sisters and sisterhood within a family, but very much friendships, the importance of women's friendships outside of the family, as well as the kind of glue that holds the world together. Women's friendships have kind of a bad reputation in popular culture anyway, that, mean girls and competition, but I know, and every woman I've ever met of every age nods their head when I say we couldn't get through life without our girlfriends. And so my books, I think, honor that truth. It's an old truth, and it's a continuing truth.
Yeah, it's true. Being empowering women here, and I would like to just ask your opinion too. You've written so much about women's relationships. What encouragement would you give, say, the younger generation or younger women about empowerment in their life based on your experience and the books that you've written?
Oh, I hate giving advice. I don't like to give advice, but I do. What I've found is that I get wonderful email from younger readers, including high school students and college students, and what they respond to especially in the Red Tent, but in the other books as well, is the notion that they are powerful and that women have been powerful throughout history, even in parts of history where women are sort of written out. The biblical narrative is a very masculine narrative, and women's stories aren't in there. So to recognize that there have been strong women throughout history and to identify with them is, so I hear it back from young women as well. So rather than give advice, I think that through my writing, especially through the art of fiction, that I express my faith in women's power and women's friendships, in women's strength and grace and everything else that we have at our disposal, and that people respond to that, and in responding, that's the way I encourage empowerment and women's health and well-being.
Anita, what inspired you to tell the story of Dina in the Red Tent?
Well, I had turned 40 and I wanted a new challenge in my life, so I thought I would try to write a novel. And I didn't have a story that I've always wanted to tell, so I actually thought I would write a book about Rachel and Leah, the sisters, and their relationship with each other and competition. But I kept reading it and thinking, now what? And so I kept reading in Genesis, and I came to the story of Dina, and what happens to her is a bit of a mystery because she never says anything. So whatever happened to her with the prince in the town of Shechem is, we don't know. It's her brothers who characterize it as a rape. And I'm not the first person to say this, that he's not acting the way a rape. He wants to marry her, he's willing to do almost anything to appease her family. And so I thought, what really happened there? And then the idea of telling the story from her perspective, the perspective of a character who's totally voiceless in the text, and give her perspective, her point of view, its full due, which meant exploring the world of women, and in great detail, in novelistic detail, in a way that doesn't exist in scripture. So that's where it came from. It wasn't like I woke up one morning and thought, oh, I have to write a story about Dina. I was looking for a good story to tell, and I kind of found it right there in front of me. So that's where I started.
You have a very strong faith, and it comes out. I mean, you are as I said, you're the founding president of Mymikvah, and has that always been there? I know you've shared with us that your parents are both Holocaust survivors. Has that deep faith always been there?
Faith is a funny word for Jews.
Well, so is spirituality.
Yes,
you mentioned that.
Spirituality and faith are really not Jewish words.
Yeah.
But doing good in the world and responding to where people are in need is very much a part of that. So Mymikvah, which is the mikveh in Newton, transformed an institution that in many ways was perceived, and in many ways, in fact, was misogynistic, because the most common use for a mikveh is for women to go after a menstrual cycle before they reconnect sexually with their husbands. And for a very long time, that felt like, and especially in the United States, felt like a punishment. And what we've done with the mikveh in Newton is reinvent, redefine it. It was built by women, with women's money and with women's energy and sweat, and made it a place for everybody, for men and women and for boys and girls, to come at moments of transition. So women still come monthly, but they understand that in terms of honoring their own bodies, honoring their cycles, as well as the tradition of the commandment of doing this ritual once a month, but owning the ritual, reinventing it, redefining it, opening it to all different kinds of life cycles for women that have not been acknowledged. Coming of age, 9th month of pregnancy, fighting infertility, losing a child, abuse, becoming a physician, becoming a nurse, becoming a doctor, becoming a rabbi, and marking the transition by immersing in a beautiful pool of water, completely naked, the way you're born, and it enacts birth in a kind of way. And all religious traditions use water. This is the Jewish use of water for transition. So I'm very proud of the community of women in the greater Boston area who came together to make something that had never been seen on the planet before. It's a mikveh with an art gallery in it.
Yeah. And a learning center.
And learning centers. As more people come to learn than to immerse in the water. We have a dry side, and we have a wet side. And the dry side gets many more. We have classes from all kinds of people within the Jewish community, kids, and also church groups come, and we've had people come from out of the city and out of the state to see what we've done.
Yeah, yeah.
So we're a national model too.
So Anita, another question. With all the time that you have on your hands, how was it that you took so much time to really create Mymikvah? Where did that come from?
Actually, for me, it was a question of fairness and access, actually. I was working on a book about conversion to Judaism, and the last ritual step in that process is immersing in a body of water. Again, enacting a big transition from being not Jewish to being Jewish afterwards, which doesn't, it's like not ta-da, but there's a lot of work that goes into it beforehand. But it is a profound moment of transition. So the only mikveh that was available for the liberal Jewish community was only open 2 hours a week. And I went many times because I was working on this book, and I wanted to see how clergy used it and what songs they sang, what prayers they used, whatever. Right. And it really bothered me that the access was so limited, and that if we took ourselves seriously as a liberal Jewish community, we should have an institution and a facility that was really open to everybody and open more than 2 hours a week. So I started asking somebody, I asked everybody I met, wouldn't you like this? Wouldn't this be a good idea? And they all said yes, and I tried to find somebody to do it. Yeah. And somebody finally said to me, if you want it to happen, you're going to have to do it. And it's a good thing I didn't know what I was getting myself into, because it was a lot of work and it was a lot of time, and I'm very grateful for all of it. I learned an enormous amount. I met an incredible number of wonderful women who I would have never met otherwise. I learned patience that I've never had before. I was not a meeting person. I've never been on a board before, and this is it. But I really enjoyed it and cherished it. I'm still very connected, but in a different capacity. So that's why.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to tell you, I didn't know what a mikvah was. Sure. When were you first exposed to a mikvah? I mean, it's an old Jewish tradition.
Well, my first book ever was The New Jewish Wedding, because when I was getting married, the books were really bad. And for me, anyway, they didn't answer my questions. As a feminist, as a young woman in America, marrying somebody who had just converted to Judaism. So they were all written by Orthodox rabbis, or they were written by etiquette ladies. So it was about matching the matchbooks and the flowers and things like that. And that wasn't answering my questions about meaningful rituals. So I wrote this book, and one of the rituals involved in getting married traditionally is for the bride to go to a mikveh before the wedding. So I went to that mikveh that was only open 2 hours a week. And I did it. I immersed, but I felt like an anthropologist. It didn't belong to me, and it didn't do anything for me. And I had been there also with my groom before he got married for his conversion. And we went with 3 rabbis and friends, and it was a communal, joyful experience. We went out for a meal afterwards. It was part of life. So I knew what it could be, and I knew what I didn't want it to be. So with that, and with the vision of a lot of other people, I mean, what exists there is the result of a lot of collaboration and a lot of volunteer hours and a lot of wonderful, strong, smart women and wonderful, strong, smart men.
So, Anita, I know you brought a couple clips from Mymikvah with you, and we'd like to take a look at those. So let's play them.
I choose Mymikvah as my mikveh because it's such a welcoming, beautiful place. I love it here. I like the people here. I know that whoever I'm going to interact with, I will feel cared for and welcomed in my own sacred experience.
We built Mymikvah to be as welcoming and embracing as possible, and that meant really being mindful of the way everything looks and feels and smells and sounds.
People are nervous when they come here. Most often they have not done this before. This is totally new. It's a ritual that you have to do totally naked, and so there's a lot of anxiety, and on top of that they're coming at some kind of life transition.
I've brought all different types of people to Mymikvah. I've brought people who were finishing chemotherapy treatment and they wanted to mark that. We've had bat mitzvah girls come to Mymikvah as a way to mark an important transition in their lives. All of the conversion students that I bring here feel right at home.
I chose to immerse at Mymikvah for the first time to celebrate my 20th wedding anniversary. We both immersed in the 2 separate pools at the same time, and it was a wonderful, unique, and spiritual experience. When you walk into the mikveh and you feel the softness of the warm water, and then you open the tap and the living water just kisses the other water, it is just so warm and comforting.
The explicit mission of Mymikvah is to provide a space that is warm and welcoming of the broadest sense of the Jewish community. Every family who comes here should feel like this is a place that reflects who they are, that they should feel totally welcome, and that they should feel that this is a place where they can be at home.
And that includes people from different faith traditions who are becoming Jewish, people of different ethnicities and races and national backgrounds. It means gay and straight, it means black and white, it means young and old. And there was no such place, and that's one of the reasons we built Mymikvah.
We have a room set up specifically for families. It has a changing table and a baby bath and baby shampoos and special instructions for a parent to read to a child who doesn't yet read, and even instructions for the parent so that this moment can be filled with as much intention as possible.
Something about when you build it that way it will be pure.
The mission of Mymikvah is both immersion and education. We wanted it to be actually more than a mikveh because we realized that it was essential for people to learn about mikveh.
Your definition of a mikveh is that it's a ritual bath-like pool that cleans your soul using water, and it does it for men, women, Jews, and people becoming Jewish. That's exactly right. You guys have done a fabulous job already.
We've had many, many more people who have learned about mikveh here at Mymikvah than even the thousands that have immersed here.
Oh wow, this is really nice.
A ritual in water has been utilized by human beings for thousands of years, and it has a very unique power in and of itself.
Mymikvah is, I would say, the most loving, welcoming, accepting place that I've ever been.
It sounds beautiful. It sounds so healing and comforting to people.
And it's important that it be beautiful too, and I think women's appreciation of our surroundings and appreciation and honoring beauty in the world is expressed there, and I don't think it's trivial, actually.
No, not at all. I want to kind of speed back to your writing. Tell me, who are your mentors when it comes to writing?
Well, I had some great teachers in college, and my professor in undergraduate school, Harry Martin, I'm still in contact with, and my writing tutor in college, Sandra Stein, I'm still in contact with. And then I've had terrific editors at the Globe, at Boston Magazine, and to a lesser extent with my books. And those are wonderfully collaborative working relationships. So it's been an ongoing process, and I still am mentored by my writing partners and friends as well.
Okay, all right. And as far as like your writing process, where does that start? I mean, it's got to come.
Yeah, but people tend to romanticize writing a little bit. I was a journalist for many, many years, so I've got hardwired deadlines built into me. So I have a deadline when I write any book, and so I'm working towards that deadline. So, and that means sitting down and working on days when you don't feel inspired. Inspiration is not such a big thing. You just have to keep your butt in the chair.
Yeah.
And so every morning I try very hard to get my butt in the chair after walking the dog and drinking coffee and answering the email and washing the dishes and procrastinating and then trying to settle down and focus and work as much as I can for as long as I can. And some days that might be 4 or 5 hours, and some days it's less than that. But even if I'm standing up and walking around and walking the dog, the wheels are still going. So writing at the keyboard is a part of it, but it's certainly not the only part of it.
It's, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up what happened here in Boston in a couple weeks ago. And, what you do in your work, either through Mymikvah or in your writing and really kind of talking about women, helping women and in a healing process and supporting each other. How would you encourage people after, the Boston Marathon? I mean, it was a devastating event, and I read on your blog, actually, that you said something about, now Boston is on that list of, cities that have been, had some terrorism. And how do you not end with hate?
Well, when that happened, when the attacks happened, I watched television endlessly like everybody else, and I had to watch the explosions 20 times before I could actually register what had happened. Yeah. And I didn't intend to write about it, but I found that I had to, because that's the way I organize my thinking. That's how I know what I think. So I wrote this piece, and it ends with, I don't want Boston, that it can't end there. It can't be that we're on this list and we have to clench our fists and we have to hate, and that somehow we can't give in to this idea that this is inevitable, and to give in to despair. We cannot give in to that. And one way to not do that is to create art, is to talk about it, is to connect with other people. And I have to say, the Boston police chief, I heard him on the radio the other day, said, they asked him that question, how do we go on? How do we have a marathon next year? And he said, well, we'll have a big police presence again, but there'll be 1 million people on the course, and we'll have 2 million eyes watching out for each other. And I thought that was beautiful, and that's a statement of trust in one another and in our community. And I can't think of a more eloquent, from a career policeman, more eloquent and real and concrete way of dealing with this, which is that we have to trust one another. We have to turn to one another instead of away from one another.
Right. And that's what we saw so much of on that day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's what gives us the courage and the faith to move on, to know that we can move on.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of moving on, I mean, are you working on anything new, and what is inspiring you to continue writing and putting your butt in the chair?
Well, a deadline. That it makes it in getting paid at the end of the deadline. It's a job, and I'm working on a novel that is. I'm not talking about it too much anymore. It's set in Boston. It starts in 1915, and it traces the development of a young woman, sort of a growing up novel of a young woman growing up at that time, a very interesting time in history for women, when women were starting to really work outside of the home in many different ways, where the typewriter had come into its own, and women were hired to type because they were cheaper, and telephone operators, because supposedly their fingers were faster. And department stores opened, and girls started going to work there. So the whole world of work was being redefined by American culture. So, and the notion of going to school, and what does that mean, college, what does that mean at that period? So, and it's also an immigrant story. So it's a very rich period of American history, and I'm writing a story about a young woman in particular, and also, surprise, surprise, her friends. Her friendships are important in this book as well.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm working on now.
Your works sound like they require so much research into the past. Like, I mean, look at the red tent, going back to Genesis and that whole period of time. Tell me about what that's like, the research.
Well, research on anything, you can get lost in it with research. I'm researching 1915 now, and I can just become I can read forever about that and never sit down and write. And with, when I was working on the red tent, also, I realized at some point, I don't need to know everything about Egypt to tell this story. I need to know some things about it to tell the story that I need to tell. So I did some research, and then I realized I had better stop doing that and start writing. And there's not a lot of information about women's daily lives, you know, in that period of time in the ancient Near East. What we have are monuments made out of stone, and we have, in women's lives, we didn't leave monuments made out of stone. We made monuments made out of bread and babies, and those, there's no big history of that. But there's some anthropology, and there's some other kinds of pieces of history that I dug around in libraries for the most part. And then I invented a great deal of what's in the red tent. So it was based on trying not to make mistakes. So there's no chickens in the red tent because they didn't eat chicken. And there's, so the recipe for goat stew, for example, in that book, no one has emailed me to say I got it wrong, but because who knows what the recipe was, but the ingredients are right. So because I could find out what might have been available in that period in history. So it's a funny kind of research because focusing on women's lives, especially in that kind of period, is focusing on the domestic, and it doesn't leave a big footprint in the past. So it's reconstructing what it might have been like to be a woman in that period in history, based on some historical evidence and imagination. So it's a real mixture, and people have asked me, you know, how much is real and how much isn't, and at this point, it's a long time ago, so I don't really remember. But even I think at that time, they blended together. That's the great thing about writing a novel, you get to make things up.
And I mean, you're researching 1915
and on, yeah.
Yeah, and here we are, speed forward in 2013. How do you feel about being a woman in 2013? A career woman, you know.
I feel so lucky to be alive now. When in human history would you prefer to be alive? I can't think of a time, you know, certainly don't want to live in the time of the red tent prior to anesthesia and antibiotics and tampons, right? Caffeine literacy. I mean, all the things that make life worth living. And also freedom, the amount of choices that we have as women. There's never been a time in history, and I'm not willing to give up any of my choices, as complicated as that makes life. I think we can navigate those choices. We're smart enough and we're strong enough to navigate all the choices that life hands to us. So, I challenge any woman to tell me when they'd rather be alive than right now, or in the last. Being part of this generation is terrific. And watching, I have a 27-year-old daughter, and watching her extend her power and her energy and her faith in the world into the future makes me feel very hopeful about where we're going. As Joyce Kulhewig said, we're still fighting the fights for equal pay and for access to health care, but we're continuing to fight, and we have new generations of women, young women and girls who will join us.
Empowered women.
Empowered women, empowered girls.
Yeah, yeah. And so what's the next chapter for you? You've given us so much. You've offered so much, and you're such an inspiration.
I don't know what the next chapter is, actually. I'm working on a book. I think I'll always be writing. I don't think I'll stop doing that. I just recently stepped down as the president of the board at Mymikvah after 11 years as the founding. We've been open for 8. We were founded 11 years ago, so that's a big change.
Yeah.
And I thought I'd have more time somehow, but it hasn't worked out that way. But I am sort of looking for the next challenge, and when I finish this book. But it feels like there's a lot of opening. There's a lot of possibilities that might open before me, and I don't know what it is, which is a nice feeling actually. None of my career was planned. It sort of happened, and I made choices along the way. So I have great faith that whatever is next will be interesting and challenging and fun.
Right, right. Well, thank you so much.
Totally my pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining us. You're watching Empowering Women and Anita Diamant, and visit us at empoweringwomentv.com. Thank you. That's great. That's great.